Hey there, this is Kathy with the Character Corner, and today I'm sharing 4 simple tips for teaching children to pray. If you think about it, teaching our children to pray is an awesome privilege as well as a responsibility that we have as parents. So I'm sharing an article today that was written by my son, who's a missionary in the Philippines, and when he wrote this, he and his family were in the States raising support to get them back to the field. I love the practical, simple tips for teaching children to pray that he shares. The personal stories of how his kids prayed in situations of need will bless and encourage your heart. They make me smile every time I read this. And really, teaching our kids to pray shouldn't be hard. The first step is for us to pray consistently and set an example of going to God with our needs. And by doing that, we're teaching them the importance of praying and going to God. So he begins his article this way. A couple of months ago, I was really struggling to schedule meetings to go and share our ministry. I had a huge hole in my calendar with no meetings whatsoever. One night in our family devotions, I told my family that we were going to band together and ask God to give us some badly needed meetings. At the end of devotions, we all took turns praying. The next morning, I began making phone calls. Within the first few minutes of phoning, I was able to schedule a meeting in the exact place and time that I needed it. It was such an obvious answer to prayer. After I finished talking to the pastor, I ran out to the living room where the kids were playing. I said, "Guess what? God just gave us a meeting." Michael and Beth were so excited, but probably not nearly as much as I was. I suggested to Beth and Michael that we should pray and thank God for answering our prayer, and they both quickly agreed. Turning to Michael, I let him know he could go first. Instead of telling him what to say, I simply bowed my head with my eyes open just a little and waited for him to begin. Michael, who was 4 years old, jumped right in. He didn't even say, "Dear Jesus," or anything of the sort. With his little fist clenched and his eyes tightly shut, he said, "We so excited? We got a meeting. Please give us more meetings. Amen." So how do you teach little children how to pray? This is an example. The next morning, we packed up and loaded the van. However, when we all got into the van, it decided that it didn't want to start. The battery was stone dead. We all piled back out of the van, and I told Beth and Michael that we needed to pray and ask God to help us get our van fixed. We knelt down in the living room, and Michael went first once again. He refrained from any kind of opening statement again and jumped right into his prayer. He said, "We not excited. Our van is broke. God, please help us get our van fixed, and please help us to get more meetings. Amen." Then it was Beth's turn. She bowed her head, and with pathos that I could never describe in writing, she began, "Dear God, please help us to get our van fixed. Please send someone to help us fix our van because we don't know what to do, and we just really need you, God. Amen." An hour or two later, the pastor of the church that we were with the previous evening sent a couple of men out to the house where we were staying. When they pulled into the driveway, Beth was ecstatic. She looked out the window and said, Daddy, this is what I prayed, that God would send someone to help us with our van. God answered my prayer." She was so excited. And it's kind of a strange thing. I want to help my children learn to pray, but I don't want to tell them what to say word for word, because it's very easy for children to fall into the habit of always saying the exact same thing from rote memory. While I'm certainly not against that, it really isn't what I want to teach my children. I want them to understand that they can talk to God just like they would talk with anyone else. Rather than simply reciting a memorized prayer, they should feel free to speak to Him from their hearts. It's important that they also recognize how God hears and answers their prayers. Though Ruth and I are far from experts, and I have to admit that I haven't been nearly as consistent in praying with my children as I should be, I feel that God has taught me some things that could be helpful to you as you seek to teach your own children to pray. Number 1, teaching children to pray means taking the time to teach and train them. Proverbs 22:6 says, "Train up a child in the way he should go." If your children ever learn to pray, it will not be an accident. It will happen because you, as their parent, go out of your way to train them. Training has to be done on purpose. No child has ever learned to read by accident. Somebody had to teach them how to read. It was on purpose. If our children are going to learn to pray, it will not happen by accident. Somebody has to teach them, and we as the parents should be that somebody. Number two, teaching children to pray is best done when you as the parent have a regular walk with God yourself. Whether we like it or not, our children will learn far more from what we do than what we say. We will never succeed in teaching our children to do something that we don't practice personally. That old saying, do as I say, not as I do, simply doesn't work in parenting. You'll never teach your children to pray if you are not walking with God yourself. Number three, teaching children to pray requires that they know that you walk with God regularly. It's not enough for you to just do it. It's important that they know that. And they should realize that you have a regular walk with God, and that should be a common knowledge in your home, that you regularly spend time talking to God in prayer. Personally, I like to walk when I pray, and at 6 and 4 years old, my children have picked up on this. A few weeks ago, on a chilly morning, as I was returning from my walk, my son Michael looked at me knowingly and said, I know where you've been. Then, pointing his finger in the air, he said emphatically, You've been talking to God. He had no idea what a blessing that was to me. My children are absolutely convinced that their daddy knows God, and that encourages me immensely. Number four, teaching children to pray requires that they practice. When my children were very young, I would lead them in a sentence by sentence prayer, but as they've gotten older, I've begun allowing them to form their own prayers. Like I said earlier, I don't want them to simply quote a prayer from memory. I want them to talk to God like he's a real person, because he is a real person. Over the last couple of months, I've been encouraged by the fact that my children seem to be becoming more comfortable with talking to God. My wife and I have done a couple of things that I think have helped with that. First, I tell my kids what to pray for, but not exactly how to say it. Each time I have the children pray, I give them one or two, occasionally three things to pray for. I then allow them to pray without any interference from me. They may pray for 10 seconds or a couple of minutes, but they're using their own words. The other thing I've done with my kids wasn't really intentional to begin with, but every time we prayed, I would change the prayer request. Though it wasn't purposeful at the beginning, I was preventing my children from falling into a habit of always saying the same thing in their prayers. And that's probably the most useful thing that I've done. If I can keep my children praying about a variety of things, they'll never reach the point where prayer is nothing more than the quoting of memorized platitudes. I'd like to close with this simple thought. We teach our children to brush their teeth and make their beds. We teach them how to read and write. We teach them proper manners and respect. But are we teaching our children how to pray? And I'm going to also post a couple of I'll put the links for some related posts on prayer and children in the notes that will help you and also encourage you as you seek to teach your children how to pray.